चैव सिन्धु प्रियं भारतं सर्वथा दर्शनीयं प्रियं भारतं सर्वथा दर्शनीयम् धनानां निधानं धरायां प्रधानम् इदं भारतं देवलोकेन तुल्यम् यशो यस्य शुभ्रं विदेशेषु गीतं प्रियं भारतं तत् सदा पूजनीयं प्रियं भारतं तत् सदा पूजनीयम्
Say at the outset that you don't have to accept anything that I'm saying at face value. I always encourage my readers and viewers to cross-check what I'm saying. As a historian, it is very important for me to open my work to critical scrutiny. I would never ask you to accept what I'm saying without cross-checking. And that cross-checking has become very easy now because many of the ancient inscriptions, they have been deciphered and they have been put on the public domain by the Archaeological Survey of India. Many of the texts that were written by medieval and European travelers to India have also been translated into English over the years, and they are also available to anyone who is interested. So first thing I want to say is that I'm trying to be as objective as possible in my research. I do not impose my views on the reader or viewer. I place the facts and leave it for the intelligent viewer or reader to draw his or her own conclusions. Now, having made this statement, I've made this statement because as a student of history, I was taught by Marxist historians, and it took me decades to understand how much they had distorted our past, what facts they had concealed. So I don't want to be open to the charge that I have ever concealed facts. So having said this, I come to the topic. Now, the thing is that the 7th, 8th century, which began with the invasion of the Arabs and Turks, marked a radical break in the Indian history. Now, why do I say it marked a radical break? India had been invaded in the ancient period also. Parts of northwestern India had been ruled by a series of foreign invaders. Before the coming of the foreign invaders, there is a strong tradition that the Greek Pythagoras also visited India. We all know Pythagoras because the famous theorem, but most of us do not know that Pythagoras is equally important for a doctrine that he taught there, that is the doctrine of metempsychosis, which is belief in rebirth. That belief is something that endures over the thousands of years in India till today. So Pythagoras is the first person to have come to India as a seeker of Indian knowledge. I don't want to get into others who came for seeking Indian knowledge, but there were a series of invaders. We had invasions by the Bactrian Greeks, the Shakas, the Kushans, the Huns, to name a few. But none of these invaders ever attempted to erase Indian culture or the marks of Indian civilization, and none of them ever attempted to impose their own belief system on the people of the subcontinent. In fact, I want to give you the example of a Bactrian Greek, Milinda. He ruled over parts of northwestern India, And he is, why do we remember him today? Because he has been immortalized in a play called The Questions of King Milinda. So this Questions of King Milinda, that was the debates that he had with Indian religious and spiritual personnel, and how he met a Buddhist teacher, Nag Sen, and got impressed by the arguments of the other person and is said to have embraced Buddhism. After that, there are so many people, the Shakas, they became promoters of, there is the Mathura inscription that we still have of the wife of a Shaka king in Mathura, talking about her donation and how she created centers for Buddhism. So Kanishk, we all know, and the most important last invasion before the coming of the Arabs and Turks was of the Huns. We all have this vivid memory of the Huns as savages and barbarians who devastated wherever they went. In India also, that is applicable for parts of the country, but Meher Kula, the last important Hun ruler, actually embraced Shaivism. He became a Shiva devotee. And how do we know that? Because an inscription of his was found in Gwalior by the British archaeologist Alexander Cunningham. So the coming of the Arabs and Turks in the 7th century is our radical departure from what had happened to India before that. Again, I repeat, invaders came to India, ruled over parts of northwestern India before the coming of the Arabs and Turks. They never imposed their own belief system on the people of the subcontinent. And in fact, they embraced the spiritual traditions of this subcontinent. That is why we don't have any feeling of fear when we talk about the earlier invasions. We don't even remember who they were because they have assimilated themselves so completely in the culture of the subcontinent. Now, the problem begins when we have the Arab and Turkish invasions. Now, it is very surprising that the Arabs and Turks, they met such resistance in India that it took them 75 years just to capture tiny Sindh. And it took them almost 4 centuries to bring Punjab under their control. That was the kind of severe resistance that they met from the people of the subcontinent. Now, when the British historians, colonial historians, started writing about India, about Indian history, and then they were succeeded by the Marxist historians. The British colonial historians were interested in presenting divisions in Hindu society, and the Marxist historians were interested in covering up the sorry story of iconoclasm in the subcontinent. It is such a sad story that it makes very painful reading and viewing. When we come to the 18th century, we find that there is no standing temple in the whole of North India. All the temples have been destroyed one after another by a series of invaders and rulers. The India that we see, the North India that we see today, is a creation of Hindu rulers who started coming to power in the 18th century when Mughal rule began to decline. So we have forgotten how much havoc the rulers of the medieval period played with the civilizational and spiritual heritage of this country. But it is so remarkable that when the Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, they had lost all power, even then they did not give up their loyalty, adherence, and commitment to their spiritual and cultural heritage. And many people, many historians, Marxist historians have said that, this story of the Hindu trauma, it's a myth that was created by the British. They say that if the Hindus were actually traumatized by what happened to them in the medieval period, they would have recorded it somewhere. No? So you will be surprised to know how much evidence I have found of the medieval period by Indians of the subcontinent recording. And none of this evidence has been mentioned in any Marxist work on the medieval period. You've all heard of Mahmud Ghaznavi. He's supposed to have invaded India 17 times. And the last important attack was on the temple of Somnath. And when he destroyed the temple of Somnath, he wanted some Indian guide to show him the route back, a short route back, when he was going back home. So this is what I'm saying has been recorded by a Muslim historian in Persian, which can be checked by everyone. Now, this Persian account, it says that Mahmud Ghaznavi asked for guide to take him, give him a short route back home. So an Indian guide volunteered to take him. After 1 day of march, the army said, now we want water, please take us to the nearby source of water. Because the army is on the march, so they need water. So that Indian guide said, you will not find any water on this route. I have deliberately taken you on this route so that you do not find water. This is my revenge for what you did to my deity. So this kind of record, should we not know about it? After all, our ancestors, they were powerless. They didn't have money, they didn't have power, and they were ordinary people who took on the might of the invaders. This is one. Then, there was a Jain minister in Gujarat. He was an eyewitness to the invasion of Mahmud Ghaznavi. He wrote a book. That book does not find mention when we narrate or recreate the history of the medieval period. There was another person, Jin Prabha Suri was his name. He gave up his employment and traveled all over North India, wherever he could go, to record what had happened to the temples in those places. And he tells his community that don't worry, even if the temples have been destroyed and the murti is damaged, the image is damaged, they still retain their old power. You go on worshipping them. Don't leave up your faith. This is the kind of response which is very difficult to find in other countries. In the South, because I'm only talking about the North, in the South, there was a prince of the Vijayanagar Empire. His queen, her name was Ganga Devi. Ganga Devi wrote a poem in Sanskrit in which she says that, the Kaveri has turned red with the blood of the people who have fallen in battle. In the temples, the sound of the mridang has been replaced by the howls of jackals. And she says that, everything is devastated. And then Devi, mother, came to my husband in a dream and she handed him the sword and she said, get up and fight to restore dharma. So these kind of stories, there are so many of them. Of Tirupati, you have all heard of Tirupati temple. There is a poem that was written in Telugu. It is 100 verses long and 99 verses have survived. And again, that poet, he's an ordinary person. He's writing about what has happened to the temple. And he's saying, God, why are you so helpless? I'm pained to see you helpless. Why don't you protect yourself? There's 99 verses. Then at the end of the verse, he says, I'm so sorry. I have said things to you which I should not have said, but I'm feeling so helpless. He says, please forgive me. God, please forgive me. But it was in my anguish and pain that I'm not able to do anything. That's why I composed this poem. I realize that I should not have talked to you like this, but it was the anguish. So this kind of subaltern voices, if we can use that term which is popular today, but I would call it the voices of ordinary people. Now, these are people, as again I'm saying, they had lost political power. They were not wealthy people, but they thought it is important for them to contribute in any manner that they could to preserve their heritage. So this is an introductory point that I wanted to make. Second point I want to make before I come to my main topic is that wherever temples were destroyed, the temples were destroyed, but the Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, and whoever else of the subcontinent, they did not give up their loyalty to that temple. So when a temple was destroyed, they would either create a new temple as near as possible to the old temple. If the murti was destroyed, the image was destroyed, they would go on replacing the image. Now, the first instance of an attack on Indian temples was in Multan, because that was in Sindh, and that was the first place that fell to the invading Arab armies. In Sindh, the most famous temple was the Sun Temple. It was revered all over India. Kings from all over India would send their, tribute, homage, they would come. It was a beautiful temple. The Chinese traveler Huan Sang, who came to India in the 7th century, has left an eyewitness account because he visited that temple. That is the last eyewitness account that we have of the Sun Temple. And Huan Sang says that the image is of gold. It is decorated with these precious stones and diamond jewelry, etc. Eyewitness account of the Sun Temple. This Sun Temple was destroyed when the Arabs invaded. And what we find, and all these statements of mine, again, I'm saying you can verify them. These instances I have mentioned in my book, Flight of Deities, where I have quoted each and every Arab, Moroccan, European traveler who came to Multan after the destruction of the temple, and you can find all those books on the net. So after the Sun Temple is destroyed, we have a Moroccan traveler who comes 2-3 centuries later, and he says that, the people, they have a wooden murti, a wooden image. And whenever there's a fear of another attack, they run away with that image. And when that fear goes, they bring back that image. So that golden image was replaced by a wooden image, because the wooden image would be probably lighter to run away with. And they had experienced iconoclasm, so they realized that they have to have a strategy. So imagine any other community in the world that you take away the image. If the image is destroyed, you don't give up worshipping over there. You make another image, and you make it in such a way that you can run away with that image, because the temple was not attacked only once. Somnath was attacked 6 times, at least. So every temple was attacked again and again and again. So many cases, the devotees could run away with the image. In many cases, because they had not experienced this before, they had no experience of attacks on temples. So in many cases, the temple images were destroyed. They would bring back another image, make another image, and continue worshipping over there. So this is the sorry history of the medieval period that we continue to experience even today. Because some Marxist historians say, why are you raking up these issues? Let the past be in the past. But the point is that the past refuses to remain in the past, because we have that iconoclasm theory still working. Hindu temples are destroyed in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, even today. And if that theory of iconoclasm had stopped operating, why were the Bamiyan Buddhas blown up in 2000? In the year 2000, the Bamiyan Buddhas had no wealth attached to them now. There was no king who was worshipping them. They were just standing silently, mute witnesses to how much they had suffered in the medieval period. So they could have been allowed to remain there. Nobody is worshipping them now. But that theory of iconoclasm is so strong, and it remains so powerful even today, that looking at any image is regarded as unbearable. And I just want to give you an example of something that happened last year in Mathura. In a temple, a group of young men entered the temple precincts and offered namaz over there. So this is, it is striking at the soul of a religious structure. Every religious structure, it should have it should be allowed to exist without anyone violating its sacredness. I'm not talking only about temples, I'm talking about every structure. So, I mean, in independent India, in a free India, a group of people, they were emboldened to offer namaz in the precincts of a temple. That, I'm giving you these examples so you understand how the assault on Hindu culture and Hindu civilization continues in spite of independence. And when I say Hindu culture, I include every spiritual expression that was produced in the subcontinent. Hindu is a short form, it includes, embraces every other form of spiritual expression in the subcontinent. So, it is a very painful thing. And before I move to Mathura and Vasudeva, I want to make one more point. I told you that no temple was left standing in North India. All the temples are after the 18th century, when Mughal rule was in decline and the European trading companies had begun to enter India. I want to give you one or two examples from South India, because I don't want my talk to seem just as a North India centric one. In South India, if any of you have been to South India or seen pictures of temples over there, you will realize that the temples are huge structures. So in many cases, it was not possible to safeguard that huge structure. How do you safeguard a temple when the temple priests are unarmed, when the devotees are unarmed, and if a horde of invaders attacks your temple, what do you do? So the priests and the devotees, they would run away with what was most precious to them in the temple. And what was most precious to them in the temple was the image, the murti. So there are so many cases which are documented, which I have listed in my book, where the temple priest or the devotees run away with the image. What do they do when they run away with the image? They try to bury it some places so that the image is protected, and they think that they will retrieve it later. They run away to the jungles. In the case of the Chidambaram temple, the Nataraj temple, can you imagine? It is recorded in an inscription on the temple wall that the priests disguised the images as dead bodies. They wrapped them as they would a dead body and escorted them out of the temple. Why I'm saying this is because it is important for us to know and remember how our ancestors, they spared no effort to preserve their spiritual and cultural heritage. And I repeat this again and again because the present generation needs to know, to reconnect with their past, and to honor and respect the sacrifices that were made by our ancestors. In those difficult times, can you imagine the priests of a temple disguising the images as dead bodies and taking them out of the temple? In so many cases, the image was thrown in a pond, hoping that when the invaders go away, we will retrieve it. In India today, after independence, in the last 1 decade alone, over 200 images have been found in Tamil Nadu alone while the farmers were digging their fields, because they had been buried there in the medieval period. And the people who buried them died. Nobody knew where they had been buried. And they are now being found off and on. So, as citizens of our motherland, or as inheritors of the spiritual tradition of our motherland, we should and honor the valor and sacrifices of our ancestors. Now, with this long preliminary talk, I would now come to the subject of today's talk, that is Vasudeva Krishna and Mathura. Now, my book, on the basis of which I am presenting this talk, is about the antiquity of Krishna worship in Mathura. But I want to say that this is an exercise that only excites and engages academics and Western educated Indian intellectuals. For the thousands and millions of people who worship and revere Krishna, they don't need academic proof that Krishna was a figure, alive, historical figure or not. For them, Krishna is a deity, is a living part of their day-to-day existence and their heritage. So this is a debate which has been created by certain scholars who try to reduce every aspect of Hindu belief as a myth. So, as in the case of the Ayodhya movement, we can talk about that later. Here also, there has been the dominant discourse saying that Krishna was a myth. So, if Krishna was a mythical figure, where is the question of a particular site being his birthplace? So, why they say this, we must understand the linkages. Because the other side is very intelligent, they do everything with great thought and preparation. So, they say that to ask for, to say that Mathura is the birthplace of Lord Krishna, it doesn't really matter because there was no historical Krishna. Krishna was a myth. So, his birthplace is also a myth. Now, it is very, very interesting that so much evidence on the historicity of Lord Krishna was accidentally discovered by scholars, epigraphists, historians well before independence, and so-called Hindutva historians have not so-called manufactured any of this evidence. So, when do we first hear about Krishna? You see, in the colonial period, many scholars began translating sacred scriptures of the Hindus into English. They translated the Vedas, they translated the Upanishads, Brahmanas, etc., etc. They were translated by European scholars who wanted to understand India. So, among the works that they translated was the Chandogya Upanishad. The Chandogya Upanishad was translated before India attained independence. I am making this point again and again because many people will tell you all these are doctored facts invented or distorted by Hindutva historians, so-called Hindutva historians. It is, first of all, there is no such thing as a Hindutva historian. I go by the evidence that can be verified by everybody, and most of this evidence was available to us before independence. So the first text that was translated for our purposes is the Chandogya Upanishad. Now the Chandogya Upanishad, the scholars, they were translating it, they were translating a sacred text into English. But there in that Chandogya Upanishad, they came across some verses. And the first verse said, Devki Putra Krishna learnt these teachings from his teacher, Ghori Angirasa. The name is also given. Now, scholars who were translating the Chandogya Upanishad, they said, this is very strange because Devki Putra Krishna, only one Devki Putra Krishna we know in the entire spiritual and intellectual and civilizational journey of India. That Devki Putra Krishna, we know of his story, but here the Chandogya Upanishad is saying Devki Putra Krishna learnt this from his teacher. That means the Chandogya Upanishad knew of a Devki Putra Krishna. He didn't have to invent. And then the Chandogya Upanishad tells us what Devkiputra Krishna learned from his teacher. And it is surprising, and perhaps not so surprising, that what Krishna learned from his teacher is exactly what he taught in the Gita. So this was a real revelation to people who were translating the Chandogya Upanishad. Again, I'm repeating, the people who were translating the Chandogya Upanishad were not looking for evidence on the historicity of Krishna. They were translating a sacred text. So this is the first reference that we get to Devkiputra Krishna. And we don't know of any other Devkiputra Krishna. So this is a very important thing. Now, after Chandogya Upanishad, we can place it at the 9th or 8th century BCE. That means almost 3,000 years ago. Scholars have placed it much later, much earlier also, but I'm giving a conservative date of the Chandogya Upanishad, which means that it is more than 3,000 years old. After that, we come across a very interesting statement by the grammarian Panini. You know, Panini was a very, very important grammarian who wrote the rules of Sanskrit grammar. Again, Panini was writing the rules of grammar. He was not interested in telling us that there is a Krishna. But Panini, he is dated 7th, 6th century BCE. So this is before Common Era that I'm giving this evidence. Now, Panini writes the rules of grammar. And he provides one rule of his is that when you're mentioning two people, then the shorter name will be first and the longer name will be afterwards. So supposing you are discussing Aruna and Meenakshi. Aruna is the shorter name, she will come first, and Meenakshi is the longer name, she will come second. All right. But Panini says there is one exception to my rule. And that is, if you're discussing Vasudeva and Arjun, you will always mention Vasudeva first and not Arjun. Why he says this? He says, I make this exception because Vasudeva is the worshipful one. Can you imagine? Now that means that in the time of Panini, the worship of Vasudeva Krishna, Devkiputra Krishna, they're the same people. That means it was so widespread that Panini was using the name of Vasudeva as an example. Because, you know, when you're teaching something, even in class today, when you give an example that everyone understands. You not give an example which nobody understands. So the fact that Panini was giving an example of Vasudeva and saying that Vasudeva is the worshipful one means that Krishna worship was very widespread in his time. Then we have, and you know, Panini, I must say that Panini is a rare text of the ancient period that has come to us in its original form. Nobody has tampered with it. Nobody, you know, like Ramayana and Mahabharata, so much has been added over the ages. But in the case of Panini, his rules of grammar are exactly the way he wrote them in the 7th, 6th century before Common Era. So these two evidences that I have cited, one is the Chandogya Upanishad and the other is Panini. Nobody can challenge the veracity of these two pieces of evidence. Then I would like to give one more evidence, and that is of Panini. You know, Patanjali. Patanjali wrote to explain and elaborate on the rules that had been prepared by Panini. So, Patanjali, in his Mahabhashya, that is available on the net, he gives 7 examples. All those 7 examples are from the life of Krishna. So again, that shows Patanjali was also before Common Era. He was a native of Mathura. He lived in Mathura or near Mathura. So he is giving examples, 7 examples from the life of Krishna, which shows that again, widespread worship of Krishna. Again, I'm saying that if you're going to give an example as a teacher, you will give an example which your class understands. So that means 7 instances from the life of Krishna that Patanjali gives. Like what? Krishna killed Kans. Now we all know that Krishna killed his maternal uncle Kans. So he's giving examples like this, which means that stories on the life of Krishna were very common and they point to widespread prevalence of Krishna worship. All right. Now, the one more thing I want to say is that all this evidence is from North India. So when I come to Mathura and I give the examples from Mathura, because my talk is going to be focused on Mathura, you may think that the worship of Krishna was a North Indian affair. But 2nd century BCE, the epigraphist Bhula, he found an inscription which he dated to 2nd century BCE. Where did he find it? He found it in the Western Ghats. That means crossing the boundaries of North India. That means Krishna worship was there, had crossed and reached Western Ghats before Common Era. That inscription that was deciphered by George Bhula, it said, it was the name, it was a family inscription. That family said, we have conducted 18 Vedic sacrifices. And now we are dedicating this inscription to Vasudeva Krishna. So, why is this important? It is important, first of all, because it talks about Vasudeva worship with his brother in the Western Ghats before Common Era. That is not the only thing. It is important because it tells us that you could be following Vedic sacrifices, Vedic yagyas, and still be worshipping popular gods and deities like Vasudeva Krishna. Because, this is a debate. This is something that has been drilled into our heads by British colonial and their successor Marxist historians. They say that Vedic and non-Vedic were always in conflict. So here is an example of a family that has conducted Vedic yags, 18 yagyas of the Veda, prescribed in the Vedas, and also says that we are devotees of Bhagavad, Vasudeva and his brother. So the ordinary people, they never distinguished that this is Vedic, I cannot worship. This is non-Vedic, I cannot worship. There was a happy blend. All this controversy and debates on division and bigotry in Indian society, it flies in the face of facts as available to us. We have another inscription. Since I'm mentioning Nana Ghat inscription is important because it shows Vasudeva worship had crossed and reached the Western Ghats before Common Era. It's a family that has prided itself in observing Vedic yagyas and is proudly proclaiming worship of Vasudeva Krishna. There's another inscription that was found in Rajasthan. There also, the person who makes that inscription says, I have performed these many Vedic yagyas and I'm creating this for Vasudeva Krishna. So this non-Vedic and Vedic divide that has been instilled to our heads is also a manufactured division. It is not what is authenticated by facts. Now, to come to Mathura. The first thing I want to say about Mathura is that there was a Western scholar about half a century ago. He was working on plays in Mathura. When were plays, Natak, when were plays started in Mathura? And he came across one inscription, and that inscription was by a family of actors. And they say that we enact lives of Krishna and Balram. So that shows that plays on the life of Krishna were being staged in Mathura 2000 years ago. And again, this is not me who's saying this. This is an independent Western scholar about 50 years ago. So my plea is always to, keep your mind open to new ideas, new evidence. Just don't talk and accept this version of India as a version of a civilization that was brutal, that was bigoted, that was rent by divisions, religious divisions, etc. These are things that are there. I'm trying to redress some of these misnomers, and others are also doing, but we should just not go on repeating what has been told to us by vested parties who have done no research. And they will never tell you that go and look at the sources and check whether we are right or wrong. They will say just accept because we are saying it. My approach has never been that. I always say cross-check what I'm saying. Now to come to Vasudeva Krishna and Mathura. It is so surprising that Mathura was attacked God knows how many times. And as I told you, nothing was left. It was all devastated. So whatever evidence we have is evidence that has survived by sheer chance. It is fragmentary. So for example, if we have found some inscription, no inscription has been found fully intact. There are bits and pieces of the inscription. Everything was devastated. So the first inscription that we have found from Mathura is called the Vasu door jamb inscription. This inscription is 8.5 feet tall as it stands. We don't know how tall that Vasu door jamb was originally, because only part of that door jamb is part of a doorway. So 8.5 feet have survived. The original length we cannot estimate. But that inscription which is there at the back of the Vasu door jamb is very, very important. It says that my name is Vasu. I am creating this structure for Vasudeva. It says, I am creating this structure for Vasudeva. And he describes that structure. It has an arch, there's a rectangle in the middle. And as I said, the inscription is very badly damaged. But the most important part is that he says, I'm erecting this structure where? At the Mahasthan of Vasudeva. Mahasthan means great place. So he is saying that I'm erecting this structure at the Mahasthan of Vasudeva. Mahasthan, because the rest of the inscription is not there, we don't know what he meant by Mahasthan. It can be the birthplace of Vasudeva Krishna, or it can be some important incident connected with his life, like the killing of Kans. But the point is that this inscription has been dated before 15 Common Era. Why has it been dated before 15 Common Era? Because it says it is in the reign of this ruler that I am doing it. And the last date for that ruler is 15 Common Era. So this inscription is about 2000 years old. Now you can see it in the Mathura Museum. The Vasu door jamb inscription. Where was it found? It was found in Katra Keshav Dev. Katra Keshav Dev is commonly believed to be associated with the birth of Krishna. So we have this person saying that I'm creating this structure for Vasudeva, whose name is written, and at the Mahasthan of Vasudeva. Now, present day Hindus who say that Katra Keshav Dev was the site associated with Vasudeva Krishna, with his birth, ever since our history began, they cite this as the first undeniable proof that a temple for Krishna existed at Katra Keshav Dev. Now, this inscription was not found by post-independence India by interested parties. It was found when the British were ruling and colonial epigraphists were managing the ASI, Archaeological Survey of India, with some very important Indian scholars like R.P. Chanda. This inscription was deciphered by R.P. Chanda about early 20th century. That is more than 100 years ago. Nobody has challenged this decipherment. You know, deciphering an inscription is also an art, because letters get missed because the damage done to them. And so it is not something that you and I can translate. It is something that requires a specialist. So this inscription, the Vasu door jam inscription, you can check it in the publications of the Archaeological Survey of India, titled Epigraphia Indica. Epigraphia Indica, all the volumes are available on the net. You should always cross-check. So this is the first evidence from Katra Keshav Dev. Vasu door jam inscription, mentioning that it is constructed at the Mahasthan of Vasudev. So this is very, very important. The next piece of epigraphic evidence was found in a well. You know, because Mathura was attacked so many times, most of it has been destroyed, but stray pieces have been found, you know, in a well or somewhere else. So this inscription was again found in the colonial period. It is called the Mora well inscription. Mora was the well where it was found. Now this inscription is also partly damaged, and it says that we are creating this stone structure for the 5 Vrishni heroes. The 5 Vrishni heroes are the members of Vasudev's family. They include Vasudeva Krishna, his elder brother Balram or Sankarshan, his son Anirudh, and Pradyumna and Samba. These were the 5 heroes of the Vrishni clan to which Krishna belonged, which were popularly worshipped. So this inscription says that we are creating this stone structure for the 5 Vrishni heroes. Now, how much more evidence do you want? And this evidence, this inscription is also partly damaged, but this much has survived. And most astounding of all, in 1911, the Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, Alexander Cunningham, he excavated near that site and he found 2 male torsos. And sometime later, a female torso was also found. The 2 male torsos, the head is missing. But the most reputed art historians abroad, they have said that these 2 male torsos belong, one to Vasudev and one to his brother Balram or Sankarshan. Can you imagine this kind of evidence? Can you imagine an inscription of Vasudev, Dorjam inscription, the Mora well inscription, and finding these 2 male torsos, which Western art historians, the reputed Western art historians, have said are of Vasudev and his brother. And the third statue that was found, they say, is of their sister. So, I mean, this kind of evidence is absolutely breathtaking. It is really breathtaking. So this is what, then we have other inscriptions. There is one inscription by a husband and wife, again partly damaged. They say that we are creating this beautiful structure with a tank in the middle, and one for Vasudev and one for, sorry, Krishna, and the other for his consort Shri or Lakshmi. So it is because, you know, Vasudeva Krishna is regarded as an avatar of Vishnu. So this is another inscription that has been found. And there is one more inscription that there are many more. One inscription that has been found, it is of the 5th century Gupta ruler Chandragupta. And he describes himself in that inscription, badly damaged, that I am the Param Bhagavad, the great devotee. I am the Param Bhagavad, the great devotee of Vasu. This inscription now is in a museum in Lahore. It is again very badly damaged. And there are so many other partial inscriptions that have been found, which I don't want to, tell you right now, because you will not find it very engaging to get into the nitty-gritty of the thing, but you can always look at it from my book. Now, our present story begins with the invasion of Mahmud Ghaznavi. Mahmud Ghaznavi invaded Mathura, and the account that we have of Mahmud Ghaznavi in Mathura is one that has been recorded by his court historian Utbi. That account was in Persian. It has been translated into English by the, a famous duo, Eliot and Dowson. The History of India as told by its own historians is a 7-volume work that they have done, in which they have translated all these Persian accounts into English, again in the British period. So the History of India as told by its own historians, they translate Persian works into English. So this collection also has the account of Mahmud Ghaznavi's court historian, Utbi. Now, what does Utbi say? Utbi first says that we were shocked when we came to Mathura, because the intricacies of the temple architecture, we had not seen anything like this. They are amazed and astonished and wonderstruck by the grandeur of the temples at Mathura, as recorded by them themselves. This is not me or you, this is Mahmud Ghaznavi's court historian describing the intricate work of the temples, the grandeur of the temples, the size of the images, murtis, the way they were decorated, adorned, everything is an eyewitness account that we have. Now, after describing this, Utbi describes what Mahmud Ghaznavi did there. He destroyed the temples, and the havoc that he created over there is again recorded by Mahmud Ghaznavi's court historian. So, Mathura, after this devastation, and when Mahmud Ghaznavi went back, there was actually nothing left in Mathura. So we don't know what happened there because we don't have much evidence. But surprising that 100 years after Mahmud Ghaznavi's invasion, we have a partial inscription of a man who is mentioned in the inscription as Jhajja. Now, apart from this inscription, we have no information on Jhajja. So if this inscription had also disappeared, we would not even know that there was a person called Jhajja. Now, why is this inscription important? Because Jhajja says, I have rebuilt the Krishna temple. Can you imagine? After the devastation, 100 years later, one person called Jhajja rebuilds that Krishna temple, and he records that I've sorry. So Jhajja rebuilds the Krishna temple. I'm so sorry. If this inscription had not survived, we would not have known that the Krishna temple was built 100 years later, which means that the people of that time remembered that a Krishna temple had been destroyed, and they were determined not to give up Krishna worship, and they rebuilt the temple of Krishna. Now, obviously, the temple that Jhajja built would not have been a grand structure as were the structures that were destroyed, because he was not a man of great wealth. It was a turbulent period, but that memory and that homage and that commitment to the civilizational and religious heritage, he felt that he has to make it. We do not hear of Jhajja from anywhere else. So if this partial inscription had not survived, we would not have known that there was this great son of the subcontinent, who showed the commitment and courage to rebuild a Krishna temple. Now, after that, as I said, we don't know anything more about Jhajjar. After that, we hear of attacks on Mathura by the subsequent rulers of Delhi, Qutbuddin Aibak, Firoz Tughlaq, Sikandar Lodhi. These attacks are recorded in Persian by two historians. One is Farishta and the other is Abdullah. So these records of the attacks on Somnath are written by these people, recorded by these people. They wrote, of course, after the attacks had taken place, not like Utbi, who was an eyewitness account and wrote the attack of Mahmud Ghaznavi. Now, we don't know whether the temple that Jhajjar built was destroyed and rebuilt or whether it was damaged and repaired. But the thing is that these historians write in Persian on the attacks on Mathura by subsequent rulers of Delhi. Now, so whether the temple was rebuilt or just damaged and repaired, but it continued to be worshipped in some way or the other. Now, the next important account that we have is of a Portuguese Jesuit missionary. This Portuguese Jesuit missionary came to India at the time when Akbar was ruling. You know, the Jesuits had this hope that they would convert Akbar to Christianity. So many Jesuits came to India in the time of Akbar, and some also stayed with him at his court. So this Jesuit missionary was also among the people who stayed at Agra with Akbar for some time. And he has written an account of his visit to India, which is again translated into English. This Jesuit missionary's father's name is Father Montserrat. This book is again available on the net. And he says that I went to Mathura and I found that no building is standing there except one. And he says that these foolish people of Mathura, they still believe in their gods, and whatever damaged image or piece of the destroyed temple they can find, they create a small hut around that and resume worship over there. So this is a father who has come to, in the hope of converting the Mughal Emperor Akbar. He is writing that in Mathura there is only one standing temple left, and there are many, many small structures which foolish men have built, and they worship damaged pieces of the destroyed temples in those small huts. So again, the perseverance, the determination, and the resolve to continue paying your homage and commitment to your civilization is so moving here also. And these people who came at this time, they never knew that we are going to use their writings to present a case for a Krishna temple at Mathura thousands of years later or hundreds of years later. They wrote what they saw, and they saw that the Hindus are creating small structures and putting in those temples damaged and destroyed pieces of the temples that were destroyed. And he talks about one temple particularly only standing, and he talks about the numerous number of people who come to Mathura every day. I mean, it is a fascinating account that he presents of the hordes of people who come to Mathura. What is left in Mathura? What was left in Mathura when hordes of people were coming? It was their commitment to the land of Krishna that kept them coming over there. And you know, at this time, we had people from deep south coming to Mathura and establishing their, you know, dharmshala or whatever, their school, or they just came to Mathura and tried to revive Krishna worship and to interact with Krishna devotees. People from Telangana, you know, we have the names of some of these people who came. We have people like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu from Bengal, how they tried to revive Krishna worship in the Braj, Mathura, Vrindavan area. Because it all devastated. So they said, we have to find the lost Leela sthals. This is what they said. We have come to find the lost Leela sthals of Krishna. So they come and they try to say, okay, where did Radha come and meet Krishna? Where was, so, recreating the incident from the life of Krishna when there was just devastation all around. This, it is very difficult to imagine today that these people were our ancestors, proud sons of this soil. They didn't have to be told that it is your duty to re-establish your heritage. No, it came from a deep commitment to this civilization. People coming from Andhra to Mathura, people coming from Orissa to Mathura. When the whole area was devastated, they said, we are going to find the lost Leela sthals. And there are instances, I don't want to go into that, where they say that God came to us in a dream and said, I'm buried under this earth. There was a statue that was buried there. Unearth me and resume my worship. These kind of stories are absolutely not there in the curriculum, and we are not taught these things. Only, and it's not a profitable venture to get into this kind of research, because who's going to sponsor you? Who's going to fund it? So, search on the lines of commitment to our culture and civilizations is not something that anyone and everyone is willing to undertake, because it's more fruitful to remain on the other side. So in any case, we have Montserrat, Father Montserrat. Now we come to the reign of Jahangir. The reign of Jahangir is important to us because the temple that was destroyed by Aurangzeb was actually built in the time of Jahangir. It was built by a small princely ruler of Orchha. And what I'm telling you has been recorded by Jahangir himself in his autobiography, Tuzuk-e-Jahangiri, again available on the net. So this is Jahangir himself writing in his autobiography that I told this Bir Singh Bundela that you murder Abul Fazl, who was Akbar's confidant, you murder him when he is passing through your kingdom, send me his head and I will make you the ruler of your kingdom when I become emperor. Jahangir records this in his autobiography, which you can check. Bir Singh Bundela executed Abul Fazl, sent his head to Jahangir, and when Jahangir became king or emperor, he made Bir Singh Bundela the ruler of his kingdom of Orchha. Now, why do we remember Bir Singh Bundela? Bir Singh Bundela is 400-500 years after Mahmud Ghaznavi. But he also says that I will build a grand temple for Krishna. He builds that grand temple, which cost a fortune in those times, because how much he spent on that temple, that figure is available to us in the amount of gold that he spent, and we know the value of gold in that time and the value of gold now. And more interesting, we have two Frenchmen who actually came to India and visited that temple and described that temple from outside. One is the physician Bernier and the other is a French jeweler Tavernier. Both those accounts are again available on the net. Both of them write that this is the temple, it is so grand and it is so beautiful, and they give details. Again, I'm emphasizing this has nothing to do with present day historians. It is all evidence that was recorded well before our time. Now, to cut the long story short, I think I'm running out of time. So I will now come to Aurangzeb. Now, we all know that 1669, Aurangzeb gave orders for the demolition of temples. And in 1670, a special order for the destruction of the Keshav temple built by Bir Singh Bundela. And we have eyewitness accounts when the temple was being destroyed. One is by Saki Mustaid Khan. He writes that, the proud Hindu Rajas, they were shocked when they saw the grand temple coming down. And he says that the murtis, the images in that temple, were taken to Agra and buried under the steps of Begum Sahiba's mosque, so that all those people who go to the mosque to offer their namaz will trample on these deities. This is an account, contemporary account by Saki Mustaid Khan. It was translated into English by the famous historian Jadunath Sarkar. The translation has not been questioned or challenged by anyone. The other was an Italian, Manucci, who lived in India for 3-4 decades and in fact died in India. He wrote a 4-volume study, a 4-volume account of what he saw in India in his time, and he describes the destruction of the Keshav Dev temple. So, we may think that the sorrows of Mathura ended with Aurangzeb. But unfortunately, that is not true. Mathura had to face another havoc with the invasion of Ahmad Shah Abdali in 1757. Ahmad Shah Abdali attacked Mathura region, and that attack of Ahmad Shah Abdali is recorded in Persian by one of his camp followers. It was translated into English by the colonial administrator scholar William Irwin in 1911. So again, all this evidence is there. It can be verified. And this camp follower of Ahmad Shah Abdali says that Ahmad Shah Abdali said, I will give each soldier 5 rupees per head of infidel that he brings. 5 rupees in those times was a huge amount. So Ahmad Shah Abdali, according to his camp follower, told all soldiers in his army, I will give you 5 rupees per head of kafir that you bring. And he describes how 200 people, children, he found headless in Mathura. What was the scene in Vrindavan, Govardhan? It was total devastation. It is a real tribute to the abiding faith of the people of the subcontinent, that after going through so much suffering, so much bloodshed, so much devastation, Krishna worship is thriving, and millions celebrate Krishna Janmashtami and all instances relate to the life of Krishna. Imagine this kind of thing, that 5 rupees per head, and in one village he found 200 children lying headless. I mean, it is terrible. Now, to cut short to the present, in 1770, the Marathas were a rising power after the Mughals went into decline. And in 1770, they win the Battle of Govardhan and they acquire control over Mathura, Agra area. And the first thing they do when they acquire control over Mathura, Agra area is that they declare Katra Keshav Dev as government land. And the one thing I want to say, I'm sorry I missed. So when the temple of Vasudeva Krishna was destroyed on the orders of Aurangzeb, an Eidgah was built at the site of the temple. Now we come to the Marathas, who win the Battle of Govardhan in 1770. They declare the entire area of Katra Keshav Dev as government land. And the Maulvis of the Eidgah, they leave that place. They leave that place saying that there is no, we better leave because we have to look for our livelihood elsewhere. So the Maulvis of the Eidgah leave. The Marathas declare it as government land. In 1803, the Marathas are defeated by the East India Company. And the East India Company continues their policy of declaring Katra Keshav Dev as government land. Now, in 1815, the East India Company has an auction and it sells Katra Keshav Dev to a banker, Raja Patnimal. Raja Patnimal is now the sole heir of Katra Keshav Dev, that is 13.37 acres. After Raja Patnimal, his heirs, successors are all duly listed as owners of Katra Keshav Dev in the British Revenue and Judicial Records. The entire area of Katra Keshav Dev is never partitioned. It is always treated as one unit. Now, from 1815 till independence, there are a series of cases that are filed in the Mathura district court by both parties, the temple party and the Eidgah party. And those documents I have produced in my book. I think they have been produced for the first time. They show how the Hindus were determined not to give up their claim to Katra Keshav Dev and how the Eidgah party was trying to make encroachments. The Eidgah party went to the extent of forging documents. I'll just give you two examples. Eidgah party told the Mathura district court that this place is not Katra Keshav Dev, its name is Katra Eidgah. So the British court said, produce one document which shows this place as Katra Eidgah. They were not able to. Then there were other forgeries that they did, and they lost every case. And the British judges told them that you are behaving like hardened litigants. You lose a case, but you keep coming back. So the entire period, Eidgah party won no case. Every case went in favor of Raja Patnimal and his heirs. In 1944, the heirs of Raja Patnimal, they had a small loan of 13,000 rupees, which they were not able to repay. So the businessman, Seth Jugal Kishore Birla, told them, I will repay your debt, you give me this. So they gave this 13.37 acres to Jugal Kishore Birla. They didn't take any money. They said, you just repay that 13,000 rupees debt. Raja Patnimal in 1951 created a trust known as the Sri Krishna Janambhumi Trust. Its objective was to create a grand temple at Katra Keshav Dev for Lord Krishna. This story has been documented in my book. You can hold me accountable for every piece of evidence that I have cited in this book. What I'm going to say now is not my evidence. It is, I cannot vouch for the authenticity of this, what I'm going to say now. I have based this information on a case that has been filed in 2020 in the Mathura district court by a lawyer, Vishnu Jain. According to this case that Vishnu Jain has filed, again, I'm saying this is not my, I'm taking from him. He says that in 1968, a new organization came into the picture, Sri Krishna Janamsthan Seva Sangh. And he said that this Janamsthan Seva Sangh had no legal right to Katra Keshav Dev, which was with the trust created by Jugal Kishore Birla to build the temple. He says that in 1968, for some reason, under some compulsion, this Seva Sangh entered into an illegal agreement with the Eidgah party and handed over 3 acres of Katra Keshav Dev to the Eidgah party, and the Eidgah party illegally occupied that land. And that is, Vishnu Jain says that this present Eidgah is built on that 3 acres of land which they were given. This is important. The date of the construction of this present Eidgah is important. This is my last point, because according to the People's Worship Act that was passed by the government of India in 1991, when the Ayodhya dispute was at its climax, the act said that the status of any place of worship as it existed at the time of independence shall not be changed. The only exception is Ayodhya, where a case has been going on. So the question is, if the present Eidgah was built after 1968 on the basis of 3 acres of land illegally given to the Eidgah, then the Places of Worship Act does not apply to it, and the site should be handed over to the Hindus. The case The court has not yet admitted the case even for preliminary hearings. So we don't know how long it will last, whether it will be heard or not. But I want to conclude by saying that it is now just not the case of Ayodhya and Mathura. You can document the devastation, the reconstruction, the reclaiming in most sites of India, because the Hindu determination has left a lot of evidence. So this is not something that is confined only to Ayodhya or Mathura. It can be documented in most cases. The point is that there have to be a group of scholars who are committed to recreating that lost history of ours. So with that, thank you very much for your patient hearing. Thank you.